On July 1st, 1773, the Parliament of Great Britain passed a law that shaped the modern cities, resulted in massive labor displacement, and changed the way we view cities forever. The Enclosure Act was designed to shape cities, grant the kingdom the power to persist, and establish money as the primary tool for population control. It provides one of the answers to this question: why do cities exist? For over a millennium, humanity relied heavily on the concept of the commons. People living in rural areas didn't need money to survive. All they needed was a piece of land to grow their food and an environment in which to live. But slowly, they were pushed out of their homelands. This began in Britain and occurred at the same time across many European countries. The process involved refusing to recognize the shared land system and redefining the concept of private property. Through this process, elites and those with capital bought up more land, and in doing so, changed everything. Wealthy landowners were no longer bound by communal rules. Previously, on common lands, groups had to agree on what to plant, when to plant, and set their schedules together. Under the new system, only the landlord decided. This rapidly made planting and harvesting highly efficient, requiring significantly less human labor. Small farmers and peasants no longer had a reason to stay in the countryside. They were left with no alternative but to migrate to urban centers. Soon after these changes, human societies were able to run away from the punishment of nature. Historically, population growth was limited by available food supplies. If the population grew too large, famine or plague would naturally reduce it. However, the enclosure movement increased productivity, resulting in a massive surplus of food and supplies. This surplus supported rapidly growing cities and allowed the population to exceed its previous limits. For example, from 1750 to 1850, the population of England doubled. Another effect of this movement was the creation of massive consumer markets. As people lost their jobs and migrated to cities, they lost the ability to produce their own food, clothing, and shelter. They became entirely dependent on a cash economy. This shift resulted in a massive demand for mass-produced goods, which in return led to more job creation and further migration. This cycle has continued for decades, right up to the present day. However, this wasn't the whole story. Enclosure could only effectively act in European areas where laws were enforced through years of systemic change. The situation in other places was totally different. For example, in African countries, the population still had access to communal land. They could survive for generations through farming, meaning there was very little desire for them to voluntarily relocate to cities, work in dangerous mines, or build infrastructures for foreign powers. To solve this labor shortage, colonial powers utilized the strategic application of taxation. The colonial powers didn't want to spend a penny on their own empire, specifically their colonies. They proposed a mandate that colonies had to fund their own administration by collecting their own taxes. However, there was a major problem. Local populations didn't participate in a cash economy. So they came up with the idea of direct taxation, calling it different names like hut tax or poll tax. These taxes were levied on every African dwelling, mostly huts, or on every adult individual. This policy accomplished two things at the same time. While it generated the necessary revenue to pay off massive foreign debts, its underlying aim was to force the African population into the cities. Because they didn't own colonial currency, they were forced to adapt to the cash economy. Consequently, every family had to send members, often young men, away from their rural homes to find jobs in colonial towns. This dynamic added new layers within the cities. The elite lived in the best spaces. Normal people settled near the centers, and outsiders, such as Africans and displaced people, were forced to live in the slums. Therefore, the expansion of cities is not only the result of population growth. They exist and expand because they are the pillars of global economic and political power. They are not simply places for living. They are dynamic, deliberately constructed machines designed to make wealthy people wealthier, poor people poorer, and maximize economic production and projecting power. In the long run, these gathering spots on the maps became more and more. They also give more opportunities, so it became interesting and safer for people to live. For example, even today, the death rates are lower than countryside. The services are far better and the life, though it's challenging, but seems protected. At the end, I have a question for you. You can answer in the comments. If you were given a piece of land today, free of cost, but totally outside the modern cash economy, would you leave the city to farm on it? Or have you become too dependent on the system to ever go back?